part of the topic, but I do want to give you some background on stewardship, just because I just want to have an appropriate understanding of stewardship out in the field. And it ties so closely to these 3 steps that we're talking about. So I'm going to jump into that now. I'm sharing my screen. Heather, you'll give me a thumbs up that that's happening. Great, appreciate that. All 3 of these topics are covered in my book, and I'm not here to schlep books by any means, but it is an expounding on the topic of what I'm doing. And 2 of your bishops endorsed the book, so there is that. So it's there, available at Fortress Press, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and that's enough of that. So I believe, and I'm engaged in full-time stewardship ministry because I believe that financial development is ministry. And if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe Henri Nouwen, who said, fundraising is proclaiming what we believe in such a way we offer other people an opportunity, and that is the key word, is opportunity, to participate with us in our vision and mission. Fundraising is precisely the opposite of begging. Many of you know Henri Nouwen as one of the leading spiritual thinkers of modern times. He wrote a little book called A Spirituality of Fundraising. Actually, he didn't write it. Some of his assistants wrote down what he said to some people, and it became this book. What is it? It's a 60-page book. I've read it before my airplane got to take off one time. It's not a long read. And for culture change in a congregation, here's another resource that could help your council, help other leaders to begin to see things in a different light. And again, fundraising, it's a way to proclaim what we believe in such a way we offer other people the opportunity to invest and be part of our vision and mission. Quick story, I was a camp counselor. I love camp ministry. My call to ministry came in outdoor ministry. It's where I met my wife. I love outdoor ministry. I have no desire to be a cabin counselor ever again, but I do desire to be part of the ministry that takes place in outdoor ministry. And so I invest my money into that ministry, which I believe makes me part of their vision and mission. That's an opportunity for me. It's not a chore. It's something I look forward to and love to be able to do. Henri also said, hey, we have a vision that's amazing and exciting. We invite you to invest yourself through the resources God has given you to this work which God has called us. Again, not the idea behind we're simply paying the bills. That's where stewardship gets laborious, is if it's just about paying the bills. It's about opportunity, it's about ministry, it's about investing in our vision. And so hopefully that's what we're about. Real quick, this pyramid is an illustration we use a lot to show that we shouldn't treat everybody the same. And there's a difference between treating everybody the same or treating people differently and treating anybody better than anyone else. We don't want to ever treat anybody better than anybody else in a congregation. But in fundraising, we have to treat people different based on where they are. Right now, churches better be paying more attention than ever to first-time donors. As we're broadcasting our services across the country, I know of congregations that are getting gifts from people who are not members. Those people need to be thanked. Every nonprofit organization that has their act together has a first-time donor package. We as congregations, if we're not going to call and thank people who aren't our members who make a gift to us, and thank them for a first-time gift, we should not ever count on them becoming periodic regular donors, especially becoming sacrificial donors and estate donors. We have to treat people where they are and try to help move them up the pyramid. The way the pyramid goes is there's more people at the bottom. That's why the base is wider than there are at the top. And we just, in order to get people to move up a rung, they need to be treated differently. And so when you create a stewardship plan to treat everybody the same, really ends up meaning you're not talking to anyone, or you're talking to not the people that you necessarily need to. And I think I'll illustrate a little bit of what that means here in just a couple of minutes when we see how much money comes from the people at the top versus the people at the bottom. I don't ever want to ignore anyone, but I want to spend different seasons focused on different people okay? So if you put all of your time into the periodic donors, you're going to do that probably at the expense of your sacrificial donors and your tithers, which is probably not what you want to do. But I always want to spend some time nurturing each group on the rung, all right? The key thing to know about putting together an effective stewardship program is that we must inform, motivate, ask, and think, okay? If we inform and ask without motivating, people are going to be left thinking we just wanted their money. And this is the biggest mistake made in most congregation stewardship efforts, is we fail to motivate. Motivate isn't just writing in all caps and putting an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. Motivate is talking about impact, talking about what God is doing, talking about the difference that is being made in the world. I don't have time to really dig into all of that today, but failure to motivate and just going from informing to asking is going to make people feel like stewardship is simply a financial transaction. And that is by no means what we want people to feel like with us. We want people to feel like they're investing in a ministry and that their gift is going to make a difference. Furthermore, if we fail to ask, that is where we risk shame and guilt coming into our stewardship programs and processes. When we fail to ask, when somebody thinks that we have a $500,000 budget and whatever they can give would be great and they can't give very much, they are left feeling shame and they say things like, I wish I could give more. I hate it when somebody says, I wish I could give more. I want people to be asked well, and to say, I did my part, okay? So if you ask somebody who's currently giving 50 cents a day to give $1 a day, so they double their giving, their overall dollars still aren't that significant, but they can say, I did my part. I did what was asked of me. And there are people who feel shame and guilt around the area of stewardship. I know there's a woman in Virginia Beach who told me after a presentation that she would skip worship in the month of October, and she wouldn't serve on congregation council because she felt shame about her giving. But when I asked her to give $1 a day on behalf of her congregation, she said, wow, I can do that. And I'll feel like I'm doing my part and I'll grow from there. I look at generosity as a journey, and I would rather somebody start than for somebody to hear they have to tithe, and if they don't, they're failing. And so we need to be careful with that. So inform, motivate, ask, and think. And how you do that in your context is going to be different than everybody else's context. That's why we don't do a cookie cutter, but we do follow that formula. And it all starts with vision. If people aren't investing in a vision, then it's going to feel like a financial transaction and not like it's very important. And so we've got to have vision. And the next topic we're going to talk about in strategic planning will certainly include vision. So we have time for a Slido question. I will start working towards opening it up. It is now open. So what percentage of their income does the median Protestant give away annually to the church? Oh, by the way, median is the person in a line. If you line us up smallest to largest, they're the person in the middle. So if you haven't had 6th grade math in a while, like I hadn't, that is what median is. This is not average, this is the median. Results are still coming in a little bit, but where are we? 33 folks. We've been averaging about 38 people responding. So 24% of you said 4 to 6%, 47% said 2 to 3, and 29% said 1 to 2. None of you said less than 1. Am I reading that correctly? Okay, well, you're all wrong. The median Protestant, as a percentage of income, gives to the church 0.62% of their income, less than 1%. So I was a little tricky, I'll admit that. Most frequently, this question is asked, what does the average Protestant give away as a percentage of their income? If I had asked that, 49% of you would have been correct. The average Protestant does give about 2.1% of their income, or Protestant on average gives 2.1% of their income. But what I asked was the median. So half of us give less, half of us give more, and that number is 0.62%. That statistic is talked about in my book. I lifted that from a book called Passing the Plate, which was a sociological study of giving. Fascinating read for people, nerds like me, who really want to dig into the sociological aspects of giving and where it happens. You're actually going to get a little bit more of that as we continue to move through this presentation. So I'm going to switch back to my slides now. So I'm back up, I think. All right. So in light of what I just shared, or what we just shared, does tithing have anything at all to do with the conversation today regarding giving in our church? 13.6% of mainline Christians tithe 10% or more. Most of those are not ELCA Lutherans. If half of us give less than 1%, I will argue that we shouldn't be leading any of our stewardship efforts with the concept of tithing. I do believe there is a small portion of your congregation who can be motivated by and grow spiritually through the concept of tithing, and then moving into the concept of tithes and offerings. But that is not the corporate message for the entire congregation. We're not relating to people when that's the messaging. Messaging needs to be about a generosity journey, then more so than it does that you should tithe. Because if we start telling somebody to go from 0.62% of their income to giving 10% of their income, they're just going to shut down and think we don't have any concept of the world in which they live. I talk about a generosity journey rather than the tithe. I understand that there is biblical reference to a tithe. I think we can also make an argument for a generosity journey, and I can do that at another time. So why we give, I'm not going to go into all of this in great detail. You can see the slide. But what I want to point out here is that different generations give differently, okay? When I was at the camps, we used to send parents of campers a letter inviting them to make a gift to help send a child to camp who needed financial assistance to get there. That's actually the letter that should have gone to the greatest generation because they would respond to something like that. But the parents of kids would respond and did respond better when we shifted that letter to say, help us make camp better for your kids. Doesn't make them bad people. It just means they are motivated differently to respond. So when we see the difference in the ways generations respond, that means we need to craft our stewardship messages differently to reach different generations. That's my point here. 20% of American Christians give nothing to the church, American Protestants. All of this comes out of that book, Passing the Plate, by the way. 10% of your donors, you might call them members, I just call them donors. 10% of your donors give 72.9% of all gifts. One more time, 10% of donors are giving 73% of the money, okay? We need to work to change that, but we also need to recognize that many of the problems we have in our finances in our churches aren't that the current people are giving too little. It's that a large donor has either died or moved away and isn't giving anymore, and we haven't recognized that. A lot of times our messaging in the church is that we're behind, when in the reality is the people who are part of that church who are giving more than they ever have. They're just having to make up the giving of a lost larger donor. And so it's really important to see that, and then to start treating people differently based on where they are in their generosity journey so that we can prove that statistic wrong. Now, that's not true in every congregation, but it is a small percent of donors giving a large percent of the money. I just did an analysis on a congregation with $1 million budget. They were getting 50% of their revenue from 10% of their people, okay? So a little healthier than this statistic, but still not where we would necessarily like for it to be. Majority of money in American Protestant churches stays in the local Protestant church. And we do that when we have a vision of survival and that's all that we're about. But that mindset causes people to give less. When we're not making an impact and when we're only making an impact on our local selves, it's been proven that people will give less. And so what we think we're doing is protecting ourselves. What we're actually doing is causing giving to decline and decrease and go away, and it's impacting our own local missions. All right. We need to raise expectations. We need to teach a theology of giving. Many of our people don't know that, what our theology of giving is. We need to make it easier. We need to stop having arguments about whether we should pay credit card fees or not pay credit card fees. I would rather have 97% of a $100 gift because I lost 3% to credit card fees than to not get the $97 at all. And that's the option. The option is either nothing or to pay 3% in credit card fees. I will pay the 3% in credit card fees every time. But churches too need to be more transparent and accountable. And by the way, in all of this, the donors are not to blame. I'm not sure the churches are to blame, but we need to change our methods and methodologies and what we pay attention to do this differently. So I don't blame donors, I don't blame churches, but I say, why don't we try to do something a little bit better than we've done before? And I believe that we can ground all of this in our theological teachings. Martin Luther had something to say about the first article of the Apostles' Creed. I think it's very much a stewardship message. Basically, he says that everything I have comes as a gift of God. Sometimes in my snarky moments, I say this year, instead of talking about what you're going to give, if Luther's right, then let's just talk about how much you're going to keep this year. But I don't go that route because that might cause shame and guilt, so we don't go there. Matthew 6:21 brings a lot of clarity to me to why we should do stewardship well. If Jesus is right that where your treasure is, your heart will be, meaning if people give more money to the church, we'll have more of their heart there. That's the reason I do this work. I want people to have more of their heart connected to the ministries that we're about. And then finally, on a practical level, if we're going to lead people to spiritual stewardship, we need to have strong mission and vision. If all we're about is paying the bills of the church and not really doing or sharing any stories and making a difference for the kingdom of God, it's going to be difficult at best to raise money. So that's where we need to get to in our stewardship efforts and practices. And one final tactical principle, always cast a vision for people of what you would do if you had more money than your budget currently needs you to have. Every December, every client of mine is required to declare to their donors what they would do if revenue accidentally exceeds expenses. Because what we do when all we put in front of people is meeting the budget goal, that becomes the goal, and if there's nothing articulated as to what we'll do after that, why would we give you any more money to do anything more? So declare what you would do if revenue accidentally exceeds expenses. Let people know that, cast that vision, and see what people might. The worst thing that happens is you've at least told people what you'd like to do next. The best thing that happens is that you get some new ministry funded to get yourselves out of just looking at the local neighborhood and looking further out to see what kind of impact you can make even bigger. So that might have felt fast, that's because it was. I can do that presentation in 2 hours, and I just did it in about 21 minutes. But I just wanted to make sure that we had that out there. You'll have access to these slides to go back to it, and I'll be available to you after that we can continue in dialogue about these concepts and principles. So I'm gonna switch gears presentation wise. Couple of quick questions as I do that. I see, how do you address debt in relationship to giving? I'm assuming that means people who have debt. And I think the quickest way I can do that for now is to say, you know, we don't ever need to say no on behalf of people. Certainly for many people, debt is getting in their way of being extravagantly generous. But at the same time, many people still want to give even in the midst of paying down or paying off debt. And so let's never say no for people. Let's never tell people they can't give to the church because they need to pay off their debt first. There will always be a reason. Everybody can always find a reason in their life not to give. Back when it was Augsburg Fortress, they had a beautiful little piece that said, well, I can't give now because I'm just a high school kid. I can't give now, I'm in college, all my money's going to that. I can't give now, I'm in my first job. I can't give now, just new family starting out. Can't give now, got to send the kids to college. Can't give now, paying for retirement. Can't give now, I'm in retirement. I mean, everybody in every stage of life can find a great excuse not to give. So never give your people an excuse not to give. Give people an opportunity of what to give to that might drive them to get out of debt quicker, and let them invest what they can in that. Now, don't take credit cards for the sake of getting people further into debt. I don't encourage that. So I would ask you to be careful about that as well. So, good.
I guess on a point on that, I asked the question about how to address debt. That's addressing how to continue giving or not making excuses, but actually addressing debt and dealing with it in your congregation. I would be very interested to find out what's the total debt load for all members of the congregation. Just simply, again, it's not so much about excuses, but it doesn't seem like we're really addressing how to be, it gets to be tricky, but as far as our consumer mentality, I think the US is just, it's probably a huge sin of ours, I suppose, as far as the coveting and purchasing and just all the debt we've gotten ourselves into.
Sure.
But I don't know, there just seems to be a better way than just, well, you can still give a little, or don't make excuses. But some serious issues where people are, over 100,000 in debt from either credit card or student debt or whatever else. I mean,
yeah, and there are some resources out there. Certainly Dave Ramsey's got some resources there. You might want to check your theology at the door and participate in that. David, I believe David Lose wrote a book on that. I will look for that when I have a chance to see, because I think I used it before. And that is certainly a much more Lutheran resource. So I think there are some resources out there that you can offer education for people to help reduce their debt load. And it is a theological issue, I suppose, that people live above their means. And I appreciate the concept, the concern. We could probably fill an hour and a half on that topic too. So I'll move us on, but I do think that can be a very important pastoral piece to walk with people to help them. Well, I think it's a lot of, well, I'm not going to get into all the things I think it might be. But yeah, I think for people to live life abundantly, living according to their means is a incredibly helpful piece in that. So good, thanks. So now I'm going to move us to strategic planning so that by the end of this half hour, we can just open up to question and answer about all three topics and get into that. So how does strategic planning guide during the coronavirus? And I've talked to a couple of people I'm working with, and I think I alluded to a congregation that is launching a $100,000 special gift appeal right now. And they're launching it this coming Sunday. So like in the middle of pandemic, they are staking their claim that we have some vision that needs to happen. And we believe people are going to step up and fund that. And the council this past week, the council does not have any of their top 10 donors on it. One member of the council stated they would give a $4,500 gift. Two others indicated $2,000 gifts. And the total was over $12,000 from just 8 of the council members towards the $100,000 goal, which actually, when I aligned that with a gift chart, made perfect sense that they could achieve their $100,000, their need. And so, but you don't tend to launch a special gift appeal right now unless you have a crisis. Like, well, I don't even know if air conditioning going out's a crisis right now. You can't use your building. But you know, unless there's an emergency appeal, you tend not to run those right now. And we need to be careful if we're running special appeals that they're aligning with our vision and mission so that people will be eager to support them. I mentioned my congregation raising $4,500. One of our core values is feeding people. And so a special appeal for feeding people made all kinds of sense in this because it aligns with our core values. That's why we're the number 2 partner with our Episcopal neighbors in a food pantry. And so but for us, if we had done that same special appeal, maybe for, you know, Red Cross, I don't think it would have done as well because it didn't align with our core values. And if it wouldn't have come out of a strategic plan. And it's in times like this that knowing who we are, it's just critical. Because if we try to change who we are, at this moment, then people are going to leave us behind. We've got to keep ourselves on what's most important. And I think in many ways that's happening because we have limited resources, but we try not to be all things to all people. Where I see a mission creep happening is when I see congregations saying, we just want to give money away to local organizations in our community. That's a fine activity if that's what your mission is. But that actually feels more to me like the mission of your local community foundation than for the local Lutheran church. Now, I didn't just say you shouldn't have ministry partners. What I said was we shouldn't just collect money for the sake of giving it away randomly. But the strategic plan should help you identify and declare who are your strategic partners that you can support and help. Living into your vision's no less important now. In fact, I believe our visions should have gained urgency now. If your strategic plan is solid, your goals shouldn't be changing now, but your tactics for implementation might change. Okay, so all of a sudden your goal might be to engage more people in your ministry, and originally you thought that meant growing your Sunday school program. And today what that might mean is growing your virtual audience. So the goal would still be to engage more people, but the tactics might be shifting. So I talked about my congregation with that. Another piece with that, a pastor told, I said, how's your strategic plan really guided you here in the last couple of months? He said, well, this, could have happened anytime, but they had really done their work identifying their core values, identifying their vision, identifying their mission. This is a congregation in South Carolina where they've been told that without congregational approval, they shouldn't do same-gender marriages. Well, they had done all this identity work. The congregation knew exactly where they stood on welcome. Pastor did it, and everybody just seemed to embrace it. And in South Carolina, that's not always the kind of thing that's going to just be embraced. But he knew his people because they had really done the identity pieces of the strategic plan. So that's another way in which it can guide. So what we're seeing as a firm, we have congregations reaching out to us right now about engagement on strategic planning. This is not a time when many people want to start spending more money, except this seems to be the first area that people have recognized a tremendous deficit that they need help walking through. And we do a program called Stewardship for All Seasons, which I'm doing in several of your synods. And actually it was in, I think this is right, it was in Southern Ohio, where we had not done the strategic planning unit because we got canceled for face-to-face and we moved. We shifted all of our discussions to fundraising in uncertain times. And I had two of the pastors reach out to me and say, we're ready to engage strategic planning. When can we do that unit? And so we've now put that on the schedule for a week or two from now so that we can move them through that strategic planning process because they're ready for it. And I'll also say, I was engaged for one of these before the pandemic hit. The group, it's a congregation in South Carolina that I'm walking with. We met last Sunday afternoon, and the people told me again that working on the strategic plan right now is really a form of health for them because they can see outside of the immediate crisis and they can listen for what God's calling them to do because of what's going on in the world today. So it's really kind of a healthy healing time for people to be engaged and looking more towards the future. And I think people are more open to possibilities. So when I say a strategic plan, what's in a strategic plan? It's really two parts. There's 6 items. The first part's the identity part. That's your mission, your vision, and your core values, all right? So that's the identity piece of a strategic plan. And then there's the piece that because of our identity, here's how we live it out. And that's goals, objectives, and tactics. And I'm gonna dig into each one of these in a little bit more detail. So we have the identity piece, and then we have the, because of our identity, how do we live that out piece? So mission, vision, core values is identity, goals, objectives, tactics. That's the how you live out your identity. All right, we have another Slido question. And it's about your congregational identity. So let me move over. Actually, I'll stop sharing real quick. I have to change polls. So there's gonna be a new number for this one too. I've not yet purchased Slido, so I'm using their free version, which means I had to break this into different parts. Which also means I have to give you the new code, right? So the event code is 78403. And there's a question up for you for those of you that can get there. I'm going to copy this into the chat box now for those of you that need it that way. So a few of you have found it already. I'll share my screen so you can start seeing those items come in. But I did want to give you time to vote before you saw what other people said. Okay. Very interesting. So 6% of you, 5% of you know your identity and have a robust plan. And then almost equally divided between the other three. All right, so maybe this is a topic we should be addressing. So, all right, thanks for that. Where are we at? 39 people voted, great. I love being able to tally that stuff. I'm enjoying Slido. I hope you all are as enamored by it as I am. Oh. Okay, so mission. Mission is who you are and why you exist. Oh, and by the way, I guess I should have said, I don't argue about terminology. If you believe that my definitions of mission and vision are backwards, I will simply say, I don't care. And we're not going to argue about that. You can just shift that definition. I had somebody in one congregation I worked with, he spent hours trying to argue with me, and I finally said, it doesn't matter. Let's get the identity pieces figured out. You can call it whatever you want. It just doesn't matter to me. But mission is who you are, why you exist. And your Constitution does say that you have to have a mission statement, but it's the council's job to work on this. And it also says that you should look at it periodically. And you should look at it periodically. When I first started working, I did about a dozen years with the outdoor ministries here in Region 9. I found it very odd that the executive director would have the board relook at the mission statement on an annual basis and tweak it. It's exactly what you should do. As the world evolves, as the organization evolves, you should make sure that your mission aligns with what you're fully called to do. And it's okay to look at that periodically and tweak it. If you make drastic changes on a regular basis, I think you have a problem. But to tweak it to make sure that you are actually, that it actually does matter, that's good. I used to think in my snarky days that as long as a mission statement didn't do any harm, it was fine. I no longer believe that. I think having a robust mission statement that defines who you are is absolutely critical for organizational success. So, if you're one of those that has a mission statement that you could, hand it to the person standing on your, to the left of you on the screen here, and nobody would ever notice that you changed mission statements, then you need to work at it. All right. So the pitfalls for mission statements are they're too long, they're too generic, too churchy, and too trite. You do not have to define everything of Lutheran theology in your mission statement. You also don't need to regurgitate 17 different biblical references in your mission statement to be fully aware that you're a church organization, okay? In fact, that's not necessary at all. And I'll kind of show you a little bit more here in a minute. Here, my favorite church mission statement. This is the church I would join if it was nearby. A community of Jesus Christ providing Sabbath rest. And I think that's a testament to I feel tired a lot. Less so now that I'm not traveling on airplanes and getting up at 4 a.m. and coming in at 1 a.m. and, you know, hitting executive platinum status, you know, with American Airlines or whatever. But I find my need for church was that it was a place where I could have Sabbath rest and just, you know, live experiencing God's presence in my life for a little while. What I love about this mission statement too, not just what it says, but what it allows for everything in the congregation to do. The youth program in this congregation isn't going to be the busiest program doing mission trips all over the world. The youth program here is going to be a place where kids can come and just decompress a little bit. Worship in this congregation, you know, is probably going to start with a 5-minute prelude or maybe even some silence. And so this mission statement can actually impact and influence everything that happens within the ministry. Their response in a time like we're living in now wouldn't be to set up a feeding center, wouldn't be to, you know, do all kinds of activity. It would be to have a quiet place for first responders to come and rest. That would be the outreach to the community that this congregation would do. So what I love about this mission statement is you can truly live into this. Now, don't just adopt this. This mission statement fits this church beautifully. And that's kind of the key. So how do you create one? Canoeing the Mountains changed my perception on how to write one. Great book. Somebody referenced it in our first hour today. The author there is, talked about a formula, 8 words, not 7, not 9, 8 words. You have a verb, you start with a verb, you have a target, and you have an outcome that you desire. So some examples for this, nurturing our congregation for deployment in Christ's kingdom. We often try to have mission statements that feel like it's everything to everybody all across the entire world and nobody would be excluded. I don't know that we can really have that mission. Like, I think we can attempt and we can work at welcoming everybody, but some people, you know, not everybody, like back to the Sabbath rest example, not everybody's going to want that. And that's okay. Like, that's not a mission statement for every church in the ELCA. And we shouldn't try to have one for everybody. We're different. Another model for that would be prepare all generations to impact lives for Christ. So it's a mission you can rally behind and it makes a difference. And it's something people can understand that that's who they are. All right. So then that's mission. Mission is who you are. Then vision is what the world looks like because you fulfill your mission. Okay. This is what excites me most. I love to vision the future and to see what the world's going to change because of the ministry we're about, because we're in it. What does the world look like differently? Pitfalls for vision statements is they're not bold enough and they're boring. Okay. Or they try to regurgitate all the good churchy words again to prove people that we are a church. We don't have to do that. We can prove people we're a church by the outcomes and the impact we have on the world, not just that we get the right phrasing in there. My favorite vision statement comes from Habitat for Humanity, a world in which everyone has a decent place to live. I can just imagine all the employees at Habitat for Humanity going to work every day, believing that because of the work they do today, that the vision of everyone in the world having a decent place to live is becoming a reality. It's something they can rally around, something they can see, and something they can work towards. I might argue that they're probably losing a little bit of ground in today's world with all the refugees that we have. But they still go to work every day believing the work they are doing is making this vision a reality. And oh, how I wish our churches would have visions like this so that we could picture what the world is becoming because of the impact of us living out who we are. All right, so the next part is core values. When I lead strategic planning, this is where I start. I don't start with mission, I don't start with vision. I start with core values because your organization already exists. You already have core values. So they're easy to discern and they're true, unless people lie and try to tell you what they think they ought to be. And by the way, in case, I hope this doesn't blow anybody's mind. I don't think it will. But sometimes in the church, we say what we think people want us to say. For instance, my congregation, when I grew up, it was a mission congregation. It's in Marietta, Georgia. And our founding pastor, the mission developer, stayed for about 20 years, and everybody loved him. He retired. When he retired, they did a ministry site profile that said, we are a congregation that we are about reaching out to our community. We want to welcome in the unchurched person. We want to evangelize the world. So they called that pastor. The pastor they called was fantastic at outreach. He never met a stranger he didn't want to proclaim the gospel to. He could welcome people in. Well, do you know what wasn't a core value of our congregation? We were not about welcoming strangers. We were about caring for one another. And so we lied on the ministry site profile thinking that was the right answer. Well, because of that, a pastor had a miserable experience with us. He made it 18 months. And the congregation went into turmoil. People left. It wasn't a fun time in the congregation. And the reason was, it wasn't that the pastor was bad and we were good. Both were good. They were just, it was a bad match of core values. And so, and because I say we lied, we thought that was the right answer. The right answer on core values is actually discern who you are and live into it. So that you can only have 4 of them. You may have 4 core values, and they're the values that, if not attended to, are going to cause tension and conflict to arise. They should not be aspirational. And this is what separates us one from another. I'm in North Carolina. In Hickory, North Carolina, there's a corner that has 3 different ELCA Lutheran churches on it. The reason for that is former mergers and acquisitions and all, but they are very different in their core values is the reason that they can't come together. If we ever try to bring them together, they all need to be very clear about their core values so that they can understand where the tensions and the conflicts are and understand who they are as a system as that begins to come together. So the pitfalls with core values, there's often too many, and we try to give what we think the right answer is supposed to be. So my first exercise to start strategic planning, if you have them, articulate how they're lived out in the place. And then if you have them, also then look at your budget and see, does our budget reflect our core values? I had a church once tell me that they were all about outreach. Yeah, until you looked at their budget, there was no outreach money in it. And so then it's not truly a core value. So I would start there. To get to them, I encourage the council to have an exercise where they brainstorm what the core values might be. And then I send it out to the congregation as a survey, and I invite them to vote for 3. And the 4 highest vote getters are probably what your core values are. It's not a hard system, but it gives you a place to start the process. And then you discern your mission based on what your core values are. All right, I'm gonna move, actually we have another Slido question. I will open it up. So of those 3 pieces, what's most important for your congregation to figure out right now? What's the first thing to do? Core values, vision, or mission? And by the way, there's no right and wrong answers here. So earlier I said you're wrong. I won't say that this time. I'm just curious where you all think you need to spend your energy and time now. I will admit I made a pretty decent case for core values being first, but at the same time, just curious. So some of you have it all figured out. That's beautiful. I'm delighted. But others kind of know where you need to start. And I think core values is also a nice place to start just because it kind of shows you what you can work with. So. All right, there we go. So about half of you core values, then vision, 10% each on mission and already having it figured out. Great. By the way, I had a congregation once I was working with, and they canceled worship one Sunday morning to go serve the community. They thought that was a great idea. Well, it might be a great idea in some places, but their #1 core value was their traditional worship experience. And they might have had an aspirational core value of service to the community, but it really wasn't a core value. Boy, did that cause some conflict and turmoil. So also too, another word about core values, if you ever try to launch something new and nobody comes, It's probably because it didn't align with the core values of the congregation. When we try to start new things, aligning that with the core values is the way to go. It doesn't mean that's all you can do. A pastor friend of mine, she's in the DC area. She really wanted the congregation to do more service. It's not a core value. Their number one core value is families doing ministry together. And so she does all her service stuff through the family unit, where the families are doing it together. So what she's doing is she's attending to that core value, but moving people in a direction where she'd like them to be moved. So understanding core values just helps you move the system more than it causes you not to be able to do anything. It kind of shows you where to start. So, all right, goals. And don't worry, I'll get done in 9 minutes and we can move to the question and answer period of all this. So goals need to be smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. We need to stop having goals that are so vague we'll never know if we achieved it. I also had a congregation bring me in last year. They showed me their previous strategic plan that encompassed 39 items, right? When they handed it to me, they said, you know, we didn't accomplish much of this. And I was like, well, no joke, you know. And one of those items was something like the secretary should learn how Excel and Word can talk to each other. Well, that's not a strategic initiative, in case anybody wonders. That's something that every secretary should be able to figure out just by watching a couple of YouTube videos. Shouldn't be in the strategic plan. So when I work with a congregation, we usually go to 3 goals, occasionally 4, never more than 4 goals. If you go to more than 4 goals, you've got to have a really large system. But at the same time, you're not going to accomplish them all. I think you need bigger, bolder goals than trying to have too many goals. And oftentimes too, they're too short term. So a well-worded goal would be something like to grow first-time worship attendees by 104 per year by the end of 2023. Normally, we would say, hey, our goal is to increase worship attendance, which is a goal that never lets you know when you've succeeded, which is what drives me nuts in ministry when we never know what success looks like. And so a SMART goal, I think, can actually help us know what we're trying to do. And then we can build that goal out so that we might actually achieve it. And so how do you do that? Well, with objectives. Objectives is a level kind of between a goal and a tactic to achieve a more complex goal. So objectives to get to 104 worship attendees could be creating a comprehensive marketing plan, creating a culture of invitation, implementing an effective method of tracking your non-members. So those are objectives. Each of those objectives will then have tactics. And then when the objectives are fulfilled, theoretically, then the goal is achieved. So it kind of builds its way back up. So what are tactics? They're tangible items that are needed to reach a goal. We need an associate pastor. We need our facility upgraded. We need Facebook ads. One of the key things about all this, whenever we tell people we need money, we start with tactics, which is not what people want to fund with their money. What people want to fund is the goal. Like, people want the goal of 104 first-time worship attendees. If it takes an associate pastor to get there, by all means, let's bring in the associate pastor. But when we start with associate pastor, we've started with a tactic that people don't have any idea what goal will be achieved by bringing that person in. And sometimes we even argue in the church. I don't know if you've experienced that, but sometimes that happens. And people will say, well, we don't need a youth director. Well, if you start with the tactic of a youth director, you probably don't. But if you start with a goal that by the time a youth graduates from high school, from our congregation, they will have a faith that sustains them through life. Well, I don't know that the parents are capable of implementing a program that will allow that goal to happen. So therefore, you probably need to bring somebody in that has competencies to fulfill that goal, okay? So when we lead with a tactic, we lead ourselves into a position where we can have arguments over stuff. When you lead with a goal, very few people will argue with a robust goal that's going to make a difference leading towards your vision becoming implemented. And so that's how funding and strategic planning also align. So then tactics for the creating a culture piece, 6 bring a friend events, 100-yard signs, hospitality training, sharing monthly outcome stories of somebody actually inviting someone to come. That's how you achieve the objective. Then when the objectives are achieved, the goal is achieved. When the goals are achieved, the vision becomes more of a reality. That's the way that kind of works backwards. Final Slido question. I need to go open it up. I sort of asked this question before, but I want to ask it again. Now that you've kind of walked through all the components of a plan, do you think you're in the same place you thought you were before, or what do you think you need to do? Right. So about 60% need to invest or need to invest a lot of time. Almost 40% doing pretty well. The people who thought they had a great plan either didn't vote this time or maybe think they have a little bit of work to do. So cool. I'm going to stop the screen share, and I think we can move to question time now. So books that get into the strategic plan piece, I devote a chapter or so to it in mine. It's not a how-to guide. It's more of what you kind of had here. Board Source might have a couple of resources. Canoeing the Mountains had a little bit about it in it. It was by no means a how-to guide. Maybe some others on the call can throw in some ideas as to other good resources. Good. And yes, by the way, I didn't say this before, Elizabeth, thank you for your comment. Yeah, all of this should not be crafted in isolation. All of this has to be owned and affirmed through the congregation. I do series of one-question surveys for a congregation over about a 3-month period of time where we listen, we give feedback, tweet, give it back to the congregation, and go back and forth. If a congregation isn't involved in this and doesn't own it, then it's all worthless. I mean, it's when you get a strategic plan that gets dusty because it's on a shelf not doing anything, that tends to be a strategic plan that just a couple of people created and there was never ownership buy-in from the congregation. So I think that's important. Yeah, thanks, Bishop Guffey. And Board Source has great resources. I mentioned them at the earlier time. So appreciate that resource being kicked out there. So Chris, you've got something in the question bar about issues of justice and racial equity. I don't know exactly what you're meaning for me to address. Can you unmute and talk? Actually, Chris, your audio is terrible.
Yeah, Chris, we can't hear you.
Can't hear you at all. I don't know what's going on. If you can give me a little bit more in the sidebar, I'll be happy to address what you mean. I just don't know exactly where we're going with that. So, by the way, I think strategic planning should take no more than 3 months. If it takes more than 3 months, then your mission is to plan instead of to live out a plan. And so, please don't spend more than 3 months working on a plan. There's a firm out there that would love to walk with you for, I think it's 15 or 18 months and charge you about $40,000 to help you craft a plan. Please don't use them. It's, I don't think that's good use of resources. A good plan should come together in about a 3-month period of time. I'm not saying you have to walk with somebody else. There are resources out there that can guide you through it. But certainly going from nothing to something can be very helpful. So Don't invest that kind of time and money into the planning process itself. Maybe 4 months, but no more than that.
Mike, one of the participants in the chat mentioned, doing this as part of a retreat.
Mhm.
Is there benefit to sort of having an intense focus time like that to work on some of these areas, as opposed to, like you're saying, kind of spending some time going back and forth, giving people time to ruminate on things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a lot of that's going to have to do with the spiritual gifts of the leader. My model tends to be, I like to capture the core values before I show up. Then I like to be in a retreat setting with the council and whoever's going to work on the strategic plan, get them into a day-long retreat type setting where we really take the core values and work into mission and vision. And then team works a little bit more, then bring the congregation in as we've begun to work on the goals. Giving a congregation a blank piece of paper and talking about goals I have never seen it pulled off well, nor have I seen it be a place where I feel like God shows up. So I believe in bringing the congregation in, but I would take a set of goals to them with a couple of ideas of objectives and tactics. And then once that's affirmed, where the congregation can really jump in is then to discern the tactics to achieve the objectives and goals. Because most people in most congregations think tactically. They don't think in terms of goals helping you achieve vision, which is tied to your mission. That's a small select group of people that can really help you get there. And so I love a retreat setting, but the places for that is to get the mission and vision together, and then to give that to the congregation for ownership and tweaking, and then giving them the invitation to begin to develop out the tactics. So that's how I do it, but I know there's all kinds of leadership style around this.
So there's a question that came to me privately because they wanted to share it anonymously. It
Okay.
says, my congregation has very limited roster of people willing to serve as leaders.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of retread of leaders, if I'm reading that word right. Is there one suggestion that Mike might offer to jumpstart energy for people who are always serving?
I think common vision. I mean, I really believe that common vision will align a group of people to get excited about what's happening. I think what's happened in a lot of our churches, and I'm by no means saying this is the case in any of yours, but we've come task-oriented, that the work we do feels like labor. And I guess if you can give me a quick story, you may have noticed I like to tell them. My congregation every year puts out the notice in the bulletin, the Altar Guild needs help. Wouldn't you like to help take care of the paraments, set the table, and clean up after worship is over? And every year I see it, this little voice inside my head says, hell no, I don't want to do that. The Altar Guild's just a bunch of old mean ladies that when I was in 6th grade told me God didn't show up because I lit the candle on the right before I lit the candle on the left. No lie, that happened. So no, I don't really want to help. And then I hear, well, the Altar Guild's really tired because it's a lot of work. Well, that's because that's the only story being told. In this very same congregation was Stephanie, who's my age. Her children are my children's age. Stephanie told me that the most spiritual month of her year is the month that she spends on Altar Guild. I was like, holy cow, I can't even imagine that. You've got to tell me about that. And she says, no, it's true. She said, because I go and I set the table on Friday afternoons, there's nobody in the sanctuary. And it's a time that my prayer life can just soar because I'm in the sanctuary all by myself. I pray for my friends, my family, people I haven't thought about in years. And it's just a wonderful spiritual experience to be in the sanctuary preparing the table by myself on a Friday afternoon. And she said, I'm such an introvert. I thought I would have hated having to stay till the end of the service because she would always leave during the last hymn. But she stays and she cleans up and she says, I don't mind because I know what happened there was the Lord's Supper. And that it's such a special time for people to be able to come together and have communion, that for that month that I clean up, it's not a labor. Well, she's the one that should be recruiting, but it's her story that will refresh other people. Because what we can do so quickly is get so tied up into, oh, I have to set the altar again. Well, when Stephanie witnesses to her story of being impacted, that God does something for her through her service, that she's making a difference in people's lives, when that story becomes told, all of a sudden, I would even serve on altar guild. Nobody would ask me because I'm a guy, but you know, that's not allowed in my congregation apparently. But we don't tell, we tell people what we need to have happen. We tell people about the work, but we forget to tell people about, well, what does this do to you? I had an usher once tell me that he hated the idea of being an usher because he just liked to sit with his family. But he met his best friend because he felt like he had to be hospitable when he served as an usher, and he would have missed out on that opportunity. Well, nobody ever tells that story. We just say we're out of ushers, we need more. And so how we tell our story causes burnout sometimes. And I think our job as leaders is to help people find what meaning and value do you find in your service. And let me tell you as your leader that the service you're doing is helping us fulfill our vision. And when you have that common vision and can tie all that together, that can be re-energizing to your volunteer workers. But when it's just about labor, it gets tiring. I have trouble reading and talking at the same time. Are there other questions that I've not gotten to that y'all are starting to fill that up pretty good? I like that.
A little bit ago, Mitch asked, do you have some examples of core values? Some advocate that they describe things like what the congregation does, vibrant liturgical worship, faith formation of all ages. Others advocate for words like integrity or honesty.
Yeah, and Mitch, I appreciate that. And I don't get real rigid on that. I think that's a congregational, that comes out of your own congregational identity, is how you want to define your core values. One that I'm working with now is insisting on phrases to make sure that the core value is descriptive and not misinterpreted. And I kind of like that too. So I'm not real rigid. I would advocate that it's got to fit, it needs to fit the congregational personality. So, I mean, sometimes we get worship, sometimes we get historical liturgical worship out of the Green Book or whatever. I mean, the key for me is that they be honest. So you'll find I'm a little bit flexible in a good bit of this. So all right. Someone noticed the slide in the stewardship presentation where I was talking about having more ministry to fund than maybe is in your budget, but trying to dissuade people from dedicated gifts. So what I would say is, if we start telling people that if revenue exceeds expenses this year, we're going to make an additional gift to the Synod of whatever that is. I would make sure I knew ahead of time, would we allow people to designate that gift prior to reaching that point? Because we don't want to start setting up that people get more excited about what comes after we fund what's been in the budget. And so my answer to that is, I would tell people, as long as the gift you're giving exceeds what your pledge was for this year, or if you didn't pledge this year, your actual giving for the previous year plus 5%, then that money can go in. This needs to be a gift over and above your regular offerings. I don't want to just rob money from the annual fund to start doing these projects that people get more excited about. And having that in a gift acceptance policy and having that clearly stated is the way that you keep this from becoming an issue. Because if you start to say we're gonna invest, $30,000 in new furnishings for the fellowship hall, you might get people who are more excited about furnishings in the fellowship hall than the annual budget. And so we just want to make sure we're not moving money around by that. So I hope I answered the question that way. Yeah, Mitch just put up how he defines core values. I think that's a good summary of what core values are. Doesn't mean you don't have other values. It doesn't mean that some other values don't exist, but it would change your identity. And I go on to say that it would also cause conflict in the system. So. Other questions? Ideal term limits, 2 or 3 years. I personally think 2 years is too short. I don't know that you fully learn how to be a board member quick enough. Now that can be, you can alleviate that by having a good board development team that really onboards new council members quickly so that they hit the ground running. I kind of think it takes 3 years. It's just my opinion. It's not something I'm gonna lay down on the sword for, but yeah, I want to have board members that get the task and can really live into being visionary, being focused on the strategic, and not every 2 years have people come back that might have an axe to grind to pull us backwards. So what do you say to members who are not interested in giving beyond the local area? Remember, the formula to a gift is to inform, motivate, ask, and thank. I think when people want to just focus, and this is creeping into our society, that we're wanting to just take care of what's in our backyard. I think it's a loss of motivating beyond our backyard, because we get motivated to what we see. We see our neighbor in need, we want to give to that. My local food pantry, we're feeding people that I can see, yet there's far more people hungry in places that aren't in my neighborhood, right? But the problem is I'm motivated for my local community because I'm there the second Saturday of every month helping to feed those people. I know them by name, we interact, and I can see them. So what we need to do for Synod, for National, for World Church, for other things is to motivate them to that. And part of that's the local leader responsibility. Part of that's the Synod responsibility. Some of that's the National Church responsibility, to give you the story of inspiration that will help motivate people to want to support that. For instance, I think one of the things synods can do better pretty well across the board, and several on the call are my clients. I hope this isn't the first time you've heard this. But just for instance, the call process. Call process is something synods are very actively involved in. At the time we're involved in it, the congregation gets very interested in it, right? But the story that has been allowed to come in is that once the rostered leader is put into the call, is that now we don't need the synod anymore. Well, we're not telling the story well. When a call lasts 5 years and the ministry is thriving because it's a great match between leader and congregation, wouldn't it be great to come back in and take credit? See, we don't like to take credit for stuff, but that great match is still the synod's activity and work in that process. I think it'd be a lot of fun to call former call committee chairs who hated the synod during the process because the synod kept telling them that they were wrong until they got to the right leader. And then, so 3 years later, 5 years later, they can come back and say, you know what, I was wrong. The synod did its job, and the synod's still doing its job because this match is still working so well. And so part of that is how we tell story. Part of that is how we tell impact. I do personally think that in these days, people have seen the need for synods much more clearly than they might have seen 3 months ago. As I've seen attendance on Zoom calls, I had 117 people on a Zoom call in the Metro DC Synod this week that the bishop organized. I think there's some interest there in the synod still being in that place of organizing resources. But now the key is, can we tell that story so that people see that local ministry is thriving in these times, or at least surviving. I hope we're thriving, because we're walking together through all this. But we need to be doing some of that storytelling and having that there. And that's a two-way street, from the synod to the congregation, from the leaders of the congregation to the people. It's a challenging place to live because they don't get seen every day. And then you put an outdoor ministry in that you only see once a year when you go to it. Well, they're a ministry partner doing great work to support you, but you don't see them every day. So I think it's a lot about storytelling. All right. Do I think congregations as a whole can have passion? I do. And we see this example happens a lot where the in some of our non-denominational, I don't call them competitors, whatever they are, non-denominational churches do a fantastic job of casting a vision and rallying people behind that vision. And I think that's where we miss that congregational passion piece, is that too often we let the social ministry committee go do their thing, the youth committee go do their thing, the worship team do whatever they want to, but not moving the congregation together to a defined, unifying vision to impact the world. And I think the reason the non-denominational churches are able to kind of show that passion more, I don't think it's their theology as much as I think it's their ability to cast a vision and to rally behind it, and then to tell stories behind it as they're working towards achieving that vision. So that's just my perspective. I'm confident there's other perspectives out there, but I do think congregations as a whole can have a passion. And I think the rallying point becomes our vision. And that's why I really want to put a lot of energy and effort there. Andy's going to ask me if I agree with Edwin Friedman. I'm going to take a quick drink before that one. It's tea, I promise. I do put a lot, I do think the leader of a congregation has a critical role within the system. And I know there's many different theologies of how the pastor fits into the congregational system. And some of it gets into that self-employed, not employed piece. I do think that an emotionally healthy, well-equipped leader is a key cog in the system. I think the best leaders are those who are capable of discerning what gifts they bring and what gifts they don't bring, and surrounding themselves with people who have the gifts they don't that the system needs. I think that's where I'm brought in to do some of my best work. I think that's where some of the synod staffs come in to journey with a congregation to do some of their best work, and to help. You know, I think the best leader is the one to say, hey, I know we need a strategic plan. I don't know how to do that. I'm going to talk to a business leader in my congregation about how we keep it from feeling like we're becoming a business, but how do we develop a strategic plan that identifies us as the church we are, that helps us do this better, because I don't have those skills and gifts to lead there. I think those. So I agree with Friedman, which is probably a good place to be, right? I thought Bob would give me a thumbs up on that one. I got through him in seminary and I knew I agreed with him, but I appreciate what Bob and others that go to that school and learn more about family systems, because family systems is an incredible resource to especially help understand congregational health.
Mike, I know we still have a few minutes, and I wanted to ask you, you had talked when you met with the synod staff to prep for this about possibly offering some follow-up that you'd be willing to do with our participants. Could you just maybe share something about that so they kind of know if there are questions or if there are things that, how you could continue to be helpful?
Sure. So a couple things on the intro slides to each presentation. I put my email address. I did that very intentionally because I want you to have my email address. And if you have a question or concern that comes up after that you either didn't want to express to the whole group or that is very contextual that you'd love a chance to discuss, you know, please reach out to me. As part of my commitment to you all, I am happy to be a resource that can be helpful for that. If there are ways that we can journey together, so Stewardship for All Seasons is our stewardship group, which we're currently in Southern Ohio. We're launching in Northwest Ohio this year. We're launching in Indiana, Kentucky this year, and we've been in Southeast Michigan for a long time. If you're in a different synod and would like to be part of that program, I think it's probably fair that we'd invite you into one of those other cohorts. Or at least you can contact me about that and I'll find somebody willing to accept you if I didn't check that out with everybody first. But we've done that before in places. So if you'd like to walk with us in Stewardship for All Seasons, I'm happy to get information to you about that. Then I don't know if, you know, if we want to do another formal time for another open Q&A, but I think just reach out to me. And what I'll do is if enough of you reach out to me, I'll reach back out, Heather, to you and Lauren and say, hey, I just got 40 emails today from your people. Can we schedule a time that we just do a group session so I'm not just repeating myself all the time? And then one other thing that I didn't share, I don't think I shared. If I did, it was a while back. I have a blog site. My firm has a blog site where, and especially during this time of pandemic, we're blogging a lot more than we had been. Feel free to go to my blog. There's a paper on stewardship in uncertain times. There's a paper on what about a campaign in times like these. I have a video on communication. There's soon, if not already, going to be a video on should the pastor know what people give. So if you want some of those resources, you can also find those there. So I think let's leave it at that. If I get so many emails that we need to do some kind of another group session, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, just once you get the presentations, you'll all have access to my email address on title slides. And you can reach me there. Go to my blog and you can get updated thoughts and ideas about all of these three topics as we continue to blog about them. So.
Thanks, Mike. And as he said, he'll share the slides. We have been recording these sessions. And so as soon as I can find a way to make those easily accessible to everybody, I will. Again, I know some of you have joined us, which is great, that hadn't originally registered. So I don't necessarily have your email unless I got it from you yesterday. So if in the next couple days you're not getting information from me as a follow-up to this event, email me or email your synod first call or synod staff person. Obviously, they'll be able to help you out too. I'll just say, unless there's, oh, Tony asked one more question.
I'm all for individuals having a personal mission statement, personal vision statement of their own goals. I think that's a great thing to do. I think you'll find ministry more fulfilling when you know that you're not just busy, but that you're working towards something. Doesn't mean you're not gonna have busy days, but it means that that busyness is leading you to where you wanna go. So I think that's a great idea, Tim.
But so I guess what I'm thinking is, should the council or the rest of the staff have any part in setting and measuring those goals and that kind of thing, or is that just something just do on your own?
So I think at its best, those goals align with the strategic plan of the congregation. My model, head of staff would share those with council. Every other staff person would share theirs with head of staff, because I don't want the council micromanaging every staff person I have if I'm the head of staff. But that's my model of leadership. I'm not forcing that on everybody. So, but I do believe there's that differentiation. Dan Hotchkiss would agree with me. So. You all have done a great job of hanging in there for the Zoom conference for this long. I appreciate it. I'm delighted we could at least keep this content out there. I love retreats and I'm sad we couldn't be together, but thank you all for gathering and I assume at least paying a little bit of attention through this time and not just leaving your screen up to get credit.
On behalf of all 6 of our synods, I'll just say thank you, Mike. I know that, like you, we would have rather gathered in person, but we do appreciate you pivoting with us and making some of this information available, and the work that you'll continue to do with lots of us in the region. To everybody else, I'll also offer my thanks and our thanks on behalf of all the synod staff for, as Mike said, hanging with us. I know for our IK folks, we're going to hang again a little bit later this afternoon at 3 East, 2 Central. And I know some of the other synods have, it sounds like, other gatherings and things maybe today or later tomorrow. So unless there's any last, burning questions or comments to ask, I'll just say thank you all and have a good afternoon. Looks like people are chatting about your book, Mike, so go check that out.
You can keep that chat going as long as you want to. I appreciate that. So, y'all take care.
Bye.